If you were to learn about Sanskrit literature from most of YouTube, you might think that medieval Indians wanted to do nothing more than chant mantras and build temples and write about holy rituals in their texts. But the truth is that medieval Indians loved luxuries and they loved exotic foreign goods and told strange stories about foreign lands which they wrote about in encyclopedic manuals. This is an introduction to one of the most fascinating aspects of medieval Indian culture, the cultivation of pleasure in Kāmaśāstra literature. I'm Anirudh Kanisetti, historian author of Lords of the Deccan. Welcome to Thinking Medieval, where every week we tell you something new about our complex, innovative past. Always feel free to check out our research and citations below, and remember that we're all figuring out how to think about our messy, bloody, dazzling history. When texts like the Kāmaśāstra were discovered by colonial officials in the 19th century, they responded almost universally with Protestant revulsion. The image of medieval Indians as hedonistic, quote-unquote, degenerate pleasure seekers took deep root through the 20th century, including among Indian nationalists who then sought to reform these aspects of our history or just dismiss them outright. As a result, much of our medieval courtly literature is yet to be studied and translated. Frankly, our conception of Indian civilization itself is dominated by the handful of ancient texts, such as the Upanishads, which appealed most to colonial writers and early nationalists. Meanwhile, texts like the Kāmaśāstra were reinvented to support modern conceptions of sexual liberation, but both these reinventions actually miss a crucial strand of medieval history, the Nagaraka, the refined and cosmopolitan man about town. These men pursued, unashamed by later Victorian-esque morals, a refined enjoyment of all the world's pleasures. Such connoisseurs wrote a number of texts throughout the early medieval period, roughly 600 to 1100 CE, exhibiting their knowledge of art such as perfumery, gemology, painting, erotic love, dance, and music. All these arts were believed to delight the senses, an idea that some earlier South Asian thinkers would have found troublesome indeed. Though the Kāmaśāstra is the most famous of these texts today, in the medieval period it was rivaled by others such as the Gandhakuti of Vilokeshwara and the Nagara Sarvasva of Padma. In The Incense Trees of the Land of Emeralds, the exotic material culture of Kāmaśāstra, Professor James McHugh, an expert on the material culture of South Asian religions, studied how these texts discuss the ingredients of perfume such as sandalwood, aloe wood, musk, saffron, camphor, nutmeg, cloves, cubebs, and various resins. As McHugh shows, we can get a dazzling sense of the Sanskritic imagination through manuals compiled by experts such as Rajashekhara, a court poet from West Central India in the 9th to 10th century CE. Now, Rajashekhara's world was divided into 4 quarters corresponding to the cardinal directions. He describes each quarter in relation to his geographic imagination, which seems to have extended from present-day Pehowa in Haryana to Varanasi in Uttar Pradesh, from Mahishmati in Madhya Pradesh to a certain Devasabha in the west whose location isn't known. Now, each region to Rajashekhara contained several countries, a great mountain, and produced exotic goods. Interestingly to him, South India was a foreign place where cobras hung from sandalwood trees and spices grew abundantly. Medieval Europeans also believed that South Indian pepper trees were guarded by snakes. Danger and luxury went hand in hand, it seems. But that's not all. Rajashekhara describes a number of foreign countries to the east, including the kingdom of Pragjyotisha, which was Kamarupa and present-day Assam, which produced aloes wood and musk. To his north were Turushka, Shaka, Bhalika, and Huna, which provided horses, pine, deodar, and saffron. The Shaka or Scythians and Huna or Huns were extinct at the time but still seem to feature in the poetic imagination. Rajashekhara also mentions a certain country called Yavana to his west, alongside other countries such as Saurashtra and Bharuch. Yavana was the source of dates and camels and possibly refers to Arabia. Considering that most regions of South Asia at the time had Sanskritized temple-building kingdoms, it's interesting that Rajashekhara still regarded them as exotic and foreign regions, as foreign as the Arab and Turk worlds. His imagination was not guided primarily by religious practices, but rather by material culture. To his mind, as well as to that of his Kāmaśāstra writing contemporaries, the rest of the world produced refined goods to be collected and utilized by the cosmopolitan connoisseur, including, for example, automata, more in this video here. So, the most refined of medieval connoisseurs were the most wealthy and politically powerful. The kings of kings who conquered and received tributes from all 4 quarters, thus quite literally enjoyed the earth. In royal courtly texts such as the Mānasôllāsa, composed by the Deccan Emperor Someshwara III in the 12th century, goods from everywhere appear, testifying to a rich, sprawling engagement with the world. Persian horses, Arabian incense, Kashmiri saffron. Now, from about 1500 or so, market demand for exotic goods funded European colonialism and conquest. So that obviously brings up the question, if medieval India was so curious about the world's goods, then did it go out conquering to obtain them? And the answer is yes. Exotic produce is frequently mentioned as tribute in early medieval inscriptions and texts within the subcontinent, but that's not all. Possibly a major motivation for Rajendra Chola's raid on the Srivijaya polity of Sumatra, which is in modern-day Indonesia, was Tamil merchant guilds' demand for goods such as sandalwood and camphor. Now, I'll make this argument in detail elsewhere, but here's some evidence to support this idea. In his book chapter, The Tamil Diaspora in Pre-Modern Southeast Asia, a long-durée narrative, part of the edited volume Sojourners to Settlers, historian Suresh Kumar Muthukumaran mentions that medieval Tamil commentators were aware of over a dozen varieties of camphor, many of which grew in Sumatra, and archaeologist E. Edwards McKinnon in Medieval Tamil Involvement in Northern Sumatra between the 11th and 14th centuries writes of two armed Tamil merchant settlements in Sumatra, Kotachina and Barus. Inscriptional, ethnographic and archaeological evidence suggests that merchants confronted and cajoled inland people such as the Karo to provide them with aromatic resins, demanded both by South Asian courtly elites and the increasingly complex rituals of temple-based Shaivism. Interestingly, medieval perfume culture didn't remain static, and it didn't go extinct either. In the late 13th to early 14th centuries, a Swetambara Jain named Thakkura Peru, who worked as a mint officer for the Khalji and Tughlaq sultans, wrote a text called the Dhatu Utpatti. It reiterated many Sanskritic ideas of the origins of perfume ingredients, and as McHugh writes in another paper, the disputed civets and the complexion of the god, secretions in history in India, contact with the Turco-Persian world actually popularized new ideas in the Sanskritic aromatic imagination, as early as the 11th century before the establishment of the Delhi Sultanate. Among these were the use of civet and ambergris, as well as related technical vocabulary. In fact, civet secretions continued to be used in the great temple complex of Tirupati in Andhra Pradesh. They were once worn by the Indian elites from the 12th century Someswara III to the Malwa Sultan Ghiyat Shah in the 15th century. All of this flies in the face of ideas that medieval South Asians were somehow insular or uninterested in the rest of the globe. The exotic material culture of Kāmaśāstra and its early modern heirs demanded an active and constant engagement with the planet. If you have questions or comments, we'd love to hear them. Follow us everywhere on social media. You can find me on Instagram at Arundhati and at Connected Histories, and on Twitter at Kanisetti. We'll see you next week.